Charles, you sounded so professional.
Can everybody see the PowerPoint?
I can see the PowerPoint. Now it's bigger.
Bob, we're all on you. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning. I see Charles is on and I see Kawana is on. Those are the only two people that I see right now. So I'm going to start for their benefit in the hopes that other people will join in. Let me introduce myself. I'm Bob Cushman. I have been here in Las Vegas for 25 years, and I have been a member of SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, for 24 years. And in that position, I've had the opportunity to counsel a lot of people and share with them my personal experience of having come to Las Vegas and started my own small business, a golf cart shop. And from that, I learned the basics of how to start a business and how to grow a business. Unfortunately, it ended the way most businesses do, with people problems. I had a manager, I had a mechanic, and I had a whole bunch of contract labor. And the manager came to me after 3 years and said, "I've got good news and bad news." I said, "What's the good news?" He said, "I'm getting married." I said, "What could possibly be the bad news?" He said, "I'm remarrying my first wife and moving back to Ohio." And the mechanic, Joe, said, "Don't talk to me. I have already purchased a straight truck and I am going into the mobile golf cart repair business on my own." So if you have a business and the two principal people resign, you end up closing the business.
At yourself? Was that one?
What we're going to be talking about is not how I got my business reduced to nothing, but rather how you can sell a business and realize something out of it. We're going to be talking about some of the basics in terms of what you need to be doing while you are in business to always be prepared for the possibility of a sale. You don't know what's going to be coming down the road in the future. And you also have the opportunity to make sure that when you're thinking about how to improve your business, how it might be improved in the event of a sale. The next slide, please. I'm not getting that next slide, Charles. Thank you. Okay, so agenda. We're going to be covering all of the basics that it takes to prepare a business for sale and the actual process. We do have some ground rules, and luckily, because we have a small audience, one of those ground rules is interrupt anytime you want. More than happy to answer any questions that come up and share my experience. The introduction I've already done of myself. I'm the only one that's going to be presenting. So that gets us to the next slide, please. Okay. Selling a business. We're really talking about change of ownership. So if your business has been around for a couple of years, you need to make sure that you have done everything to make it absolutely legit. So, have you organized it in such a fashion that it can be sold? In other words, if you are a partnership, do you have all of the proper documentation? Do you have the authority of the partners to actually change what's going forward? If you are a limited liability company, the most popular form of business here in Nevada, have you kept your registration with the Secretary of State up to date? Have you maintained, if you're selling a product, the proper documents with the Department of Taxation? And have you registered with Clark County? And if you have registered with Clark County and you were a business that had any physical assets at all, did you ever bother to fill out the Clark County personal property tax for business? They send it out every May, and a lot of people don't realize that it is an important part of your relationship with the county. If you have created the business from a legal perspective so that it can be passed on to somebody else, or closed down, or sold, or transferred to a successor, you've got somebody else who would like to take it over, let's say on time. And that way you don't have to get involved with as many documents at closing, because the closing isn't going to occur for a while. But you still have to make sure that everything is lined up so that you can do that. Obviously, the other way of handling this is, of course, if you're going to retire. And now we're talking about what have you done to make sure that your business is operating in such a way as to benefit your future as opposed to the present. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about limited liability companies. The temptation when you have a limited liability company to minimize your taxes, because the taxes are paid by the members, by having a few expenses that may be, in certain cases, judged as personal. For example, you do not record how many miles you've driven your car on company business as opposed to personal business. You haven't documented that you've reimbursed yourself for the use of your car at the 58.5 cents a mile, the 62.5 cents a mile, whatever is currently in vogue. These are things that will come back to cause a problem in the future. And the reason's real simple. If you can minimize your taxes now, you can live better. You've got more money. The problem comes along when you're ready to exit the business as to, A, if you're passing it on to your family, what is the impact going to be on their taxes if you are passing it along at a reduced price, and then they suddenly have to come up with the amount of money that you deem that the business is worth, even though the books don't quite justify it. You got a problem. The same is very true if you're going to actually sell the business, which is where we're going to be spending our time this morning. And that is, how the heck Do you make sure that the people are properly compensated and that you don't pay any kind of excessive taxes simply because you're too cautious? That's business judgment. And it's important to make sure that you're thinking long-term as you make those monthly decisions about what expenses we're going to charge to the company versus what we're going to pay personally. It's no fun having run a business for several years, having produced a decent rate of return for yourself, and then try to find somebody who wants to buy the business, but the books don't justify it. And that's where you run into this problem. And it's most common with LLCs as opposed to corporations. It's awful easy if you're the one who's paying all the taxes as opposed to the corporation paying some taxes and you paying what's left, to get into trouble that way. So I'm just alerting you, it can happen. If you're going to be selling a business, what you want to do is maximize the profitability, but not at the expense of legitimate tax deductions and payments. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a business that can't be financed because the bank's going to take a look at the books, because your potential buyer is going to say, I want some financing. And they're going to say, well, the business isn't making enough money. Well, the problem was you were spending too much, and should not have charged it all to the company. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to be spending our time on is not just these dire warnings I'm giving you about making sure that you've got the books correct so that you don't impair your ability to sell the business, but what do you want to learn? Now, I see we still have Kawana and Charles, and I'm going to now ask them, is there anything in particular that I should be talking about? Guys,
I don't suppose I have any questions yet at this point.
you don't have any questions yet? Fair enough.
No.
Okay, so I'm going to simply go forward based on what I have learned, doing this for 24 years for SCORE. The most important thing, if you are trying to plan to turn the business over to other family members, is to get them involved early. I've got a lot of people who have been fortunate enough that their sons and daughters have been living close enough that they've been able to participate in the business. They participated in the business when they were younger, and now they're willing to return to the business. There's a lot of things that can be done to make sure that their learning curve is equal to what the business requires. The important thing to recognize is when you've got a business worthwhile selling, it's also worthwhile having an estate plan that includes the transfer of the ownership of the business. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we're not passing it on, what are the other reasons that you would want to sell the business? Obviously, if you've got an opportunity to leave the business and take a well-paying job within a company, you don't want to leave the business in the lurch. You also don't want to desert your customers that way. So you immediately have to think about, how am I going to transfer the ownership of the business and continue to keep the customers happy? The alternative is someone who comes up and says, I like what you're doing. I like the way that you have made a name for yourself online, and I would like to buy the business. And now you're into the whole world of what is the business worth, and this is what we're going to be spending the majority of our time on. The sales and profits are not good enough to meet your needs. Okay. This is where you run into the perennial problem of there is a business cycle and you're stuck with that cycle. Here in Las Vegas, we happen to have a rather unique business cycle, heavily dependent on tourism. But in one sense, it's nice because we have become very, very well attuned to measuring that cycle and understanding the impact that it has on all our businesses. Coming out of COVID, people's message.
Bob, you're actually frozen on my screen right now. Is anybody else having trouble seeing?
Okay, now it's back.
Oh, all right. Okay, yeah, we're back.
Okay. Okay, so the sales and profits are not enough to meet your needs. Okay. The way to handle that situation, of course, is to go ahead and put lipstick on this pig. If it isn't good enough for you, you're either stuck trying to find somebody who's willing to take a lesser rate of return. And I'm not 100% sure that you're going to find that kind of a person, but you are going to find people who are willing to take less because they don't want to work as much. And I've run into this case several times. I had a client some years ago, and she was making Alzheimer's blankets. In other words, people with Alzheimer's frequently need something to do with their hands. And one of the cottage industries is to produce a little blanket that has a number of attachments to it, stuffed animals, yarn, whatever, that provide a tactile sensation for the people who are having it over their lap. And she was growing this business, and it was getting to be a little too much for her. And she said, wait a minute, I did this because I really wanted kind of something to do. My husband is ill. I need time to care for him. And so what she was looking for was someone who would want to buy a growing business. She couldn't find anybody. What she did find was another lady cared about Alzheimer's, and she wanted to keep the business the same size because she could manage that. She had plenty of contacts among Alzheimer's groups. She had the ability to produce a decent website, and she felt she could have a sustaining operation. Well, I got to tell you this, that was 8 years ago. And sure enough, she, by having her expectations met, has been quite happy with the earnings from that business. The sale has been a complete success. The first lady was paid out, and so on and so forth. Then we get to external events, things beyond your control. Well, we've been through that here in Vegas. I've had a lot of clients who were in the food and bar industries. COVID hit, and they were shut down. It was a mess. This happens on a different scale, not that universal, where we end up with a lot of people who have jumped into a particular high growth industry, and all of a sudden there isn't enough growth to satisfy all of them. That's one of those cases where, since it's a growing industry and you just simply have too many other people in it, you can probably find somebody who wants to buy your business, merge it with their own, and continue to participate in the growth of that particular industry. And that's a very favorable situation to be in. It happens the other way. Just as things went down with COVID, things have come back with COVID. We have brand new companies opening up, catering to food, travel, selling novelties. I've got a couple of clients that have been doing great guns with the increased tourism. And again, it can be easily that this is getting to be too much for you. There are plenty of other people who are competing with you. Maybe this is the right time to consider selling to one of them and maximizing whatever else you want to do with your life. Next slide, please. Okay. There are additional reasons for getting rid of your business. You're ready to retire. I've had this happen a couple of times with clients. The world changes, business changes. Some people are able to adapt their marketing to, let's call it the electronic age. Stop putting ads in the papers, putting ads up online, and so on and so forth, and maintain their position. But it's requiring a whole brand new set of skills. And some people get to an age where learning more of those skills becomes a problem. And you can't keep up, and you see that you're going to, or you have already started to slip compared to your competitors. You're ready to retire. You're burned out working for yourself. Again, that's just another form of, I'm ready to retire because I can't keep up this pace. This happens most often with my clients who have started nursing homes, whatever nomenclature you want to use for them. They've got a bunch of clients. They've been living with them. The turnover is low, but they're aging and their needs keep increasing. And they didn't necessarily set up the entrance rules and the exit rules for their nursing home clearly enough. So good old Mrs. Smith, who used to be able to bathe herself, no longer can. Are you going to continue to take care of Mrs. Smith? Because she's a very nice lady. She's enjoyable to have at lunch or dinner. The problem is you're getting exhausted taking to take care of her increased needs. Personal issues, health or family needs. I've had people who've had to sell their business because their parents needed them at home in Vermont, for God's sakes. What a difference between here and Vermont. The important thing is these decisions come along pretty fast. You've got to make sure that you have in the back of your mind, if you've got a successful business, the possibility of needing to sell it. And now we're back to my earlier cautions about how long have you been in business? Have you stayed current with all of your required licenses, state, county, city, everything that is necessary so that you don't have to go running around trying to make up for something that you failed to do a year ago, just because now is a good time to sell the business. It's distracting you from running the business properly, so it's more saleable. And then, of course, there are those people who simply say, I am no longer going to be selling Sephora, is the last one that I had. It's too much trouble competing with all the others. My clients are demanding price reductions or additional amounts, but no increase. It's just getting to be too much. I'm going to go off and I'm going to produce my own line of perfume. Okay, you're selling to the same people, you're selling a different thing. Great. But what are you going to do with the existing Sephora business? So there's a lot of reasons for selling and a lot of reasons why you should go ahead and do it correctly. Next slide, please. So what is the main reason for selling the business? We've got an all-consuming bunch of alternatives that you can consider. The important thing is making sure that you're selling for the right reason. You're satisfying your inner needs. Now, neither of you on this call have a business to sell right now, so there's no reason to spend a lot of time on this project. I can assure you, my getting out of the golf cart business was real simple. I no longer had the people I needed to do it, and I wasn't about to start hiring and training people to do it. For one thing, they had already been trained and had worked elsewhere before they came to work for me. I wasn't in a position to teach them. Next slide, please. So the steps. I've already commented on the importance of running the business legitimately from the very beginning. Making sure that you've got your legal footprint the way it's supposed to be. These other steps include, next slide, please, determining if the business is actually saleable. Okay, are you in the right industry? Okay, the right industry means, are you, for example, in the office building rental business, or are you in the warehouse rental business? Right now, being in the warehouse rental business is a wonderful business to be in. Whether you're here or Arizona, the number of businesses that are moving out of California to these other two states is tremendous. And we can see this by the number of warehouses that are being built. And we can see this by the number of trucks that are on the road. For a very long time, trucking was a wasteland in Las Vegas because Las Vegas was a net importer of goods. And that meant you could have your truck and have a not profitable load come into town, and then you couldn't get a profitable load to leave town. No longer true. I've got 6 truck company startups or refinancing and growing. There's a lot of goods that are leaving our city, going to California, because the warehouses have been moved here. It's been a wonderful thing for the people who actually enjoy that type of business. Number one factor in determining whether or not the business is saleable is it profitable? So now I'm back to my earlier discussion about, are you a limited liability company? And if so, have you been putting any of your personal expenses into the company? That has reduced the company's profits which has benefited you personally, but that reduces its profitability in the event you want to turn around and sell it. Are you in an attractive industry? Well, I just talked about tourism. I've just talked about trucking. The number and type of growing businesses, very easy to track. Our friends, the Nevada Department of Taxation produced the monthly sales tax report. And they do it by county. So you can go in and look up Clark County, and they have it subdivided by NACIS code for each business. And you can tell whether or not that particular industry is growing. And they produce it this month compared to last month, compared to 12 months ago, so that you can get not only the short-term perspective, but the long-term perspective. And that will help determine what the growth rate is, and is it making it more attractive. Are there any potential buyers? Okay, let's say you have invented a better mousetrap. Well, how many people understand that it's a better mousetrap? How many people know how to make a better mousetrap? The number of people that you're going to find who are interested in buying your mousetrap business is pretty small. Whereas if you have a popular line of tourist items, there are always new ones being introduced. Your turnover, if you're doing it properly, is relatively high. By George, you've got a lot of people who are interested in that right now. And what you've done inadvertently is you've created a whole bunch of good assets, because you have been keeping up with what is selling, replacing that, and you have been looking for the new items to sell. You've been checking out your competition and so on and so forth. Again, that has also gone to increase the quality of your inventory. You've got only the good stuff that you're selling. And then we get into intangible assets. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on that for one simple reason. Very few people spend time assessing a business when they can't see what is there. And let me suggest that some of the things that you can't see are potential tax benefits from buying a business as opposed to being a successor owner. There are intangibles that can work to your benefit. And we're going to be discussing those. Is that possible to transfer the business to someone else and void capital gains taxes, or at least minimize them, and so on and so forth? If there is some unique feature to your business, that could work. Again, you got the problem of how many potential buyers are there. Healthy balance sheet. Okay, we're now back to, did you minimize the profits? If you were minimizing the profits, did you leave any of the capital in the business unimpaired? Okay, what are your capital? Your capital are the things like your computers, like your display desks, your software. There's a lot of things that are intangibles, but show up, if you have done it correctly, on your balance sheet as actually being worth something. Next slide, please. Determine the price. Okay. There are a whole bunch of formulas that we can all relate to. Common formulas are the selling price is 3 times the profit. Depending on the industry, 4 times the profit. What you're saying there is, in 3 years, I'm going to have earned enough to have paid off the business, or in 4 years. The revenue stream determines that. But remember, it's the net profit over time. So when I say 3 years, that means my profit last year was $60,000. I am willing to sell this business for $240,000. The person who is buying the business thinks they can run it better than I can, but where else would they buy it? And so they think they can pay off the $240,000 by the profits from the business in 3 years. Fairly rational way of looking at it. Again, it's always over time. So you've got to know, how long did it take the business to get to being that worth? Okay, because whatever their business plan was, you've got to come up with a better business plan. Otherwise, all we're doing is treading water here. And of course, one of the things that you can do, aside from the dollars that are coming in, is value what are the assets of the business. Okay. Assets come in 2 different classes. Tangible assets, the stuff you can touch and you can feel. Obviously, cash in the bank. Receivables. If you're running a bar, you're not going to have much in the way of receivables. Should not let people run up tabs. However, if you are, in fact, selling a service over the internet and you're doing it on a subscription basis, wait a minute, I've got this person who's signed up for $110 a month for the next 2 years. That's a receivable. It's not a receivable that you book in the normal sense, but it's something that you can count on when you're valuing the business. That's a tangible asset. It's a contract that they're going to pay you. Inventory. We're back to, what have we got in the way of the bar? If I've got a whole bunch of wine and a whole bunch of spirits, I've got something that is eminently saleable. I've already got a method for doing it. And that is going to be worth pretty much what the heck it's on the books for. Equipment. This is where I was very interested being in the golf cart business the way I was, because of course you have the need to replace tires, which means you need an air pump to inflate tires. You need a lot of other equipment to maintain golf carts. Welding, arc welding, a lot of different things. The inventory of that in the way of parts of equipment and the inventory of the equipment. Sometimes some of these very, very good machines have gotten old and people aren't producing the parts for them. And so that diminishes the value. But sometimes some of those models turn out to be better than others and last a lot longer, and they're worth a lot more on the resale market. And then, of course, there is the real tangible asset, real estate. If you've got a business where you have been in it long enough that you have actually acquired the warehouse, you have actually acquired the store, you have actual real estate that goes with the business, now you're subject to an additional problem of the business cycle for real estate, but you also have a tremendous opportunity because the inherent value of real estate is something that can be easily determined. There's a lot of people who do it. And you can figure it out as to what is the value in your selling price pretty quickly. Next slide, please. Now we're going to get into the stuff that the books don't spend as much time on as they should. And that is the intangibles in your business. We run into this all the time. Let's take an advertising company. An advertising company that has had good clients and good receivables, okay, is going to be worth a lot more than an advertising company that is existing, I'm going to call it hand to mouth. In other words, they're going to get a customer now, and 3 months from now, the customer left because somebody else offered them a better deal. The customer list broken down by how long they have been your customer, it becomes extremely valuable if you're selling any kind of a consumer-related business. And consumer-related means whether it's in person, online, I don't care. Those actual contact information and the length of time become an extremely important asset. It's intangible, but it's worth it. Same thing is true of mailing lists, okay? They're not necessarily the same thing. We're talking about shipping goods. But again, somebody who has been buying from Amana Meats for 10 years, okay, and is going, Christmas is coming and they're going to buy another ham from Amana, that mailing list is worth a lot of money. And you can particularly see this in the world of nonprofits, where the selling of donor lists is a regular source of income for a very large number of them. Supplier contracts. I have a deal to buy 10,000 greeting cards from Hallmark every month at the price of 63 cents a greeting card, 11 cents for the envelope. And that contract has another 2 years to run. Well, the price of paper may be going up, the cost of printing and so on and so forth, but I've got a deal from Hallmark. That supplier contract, which guarantees what I'm going to be buying in the way of supply assurance in the future, is extremely important. It's worth money. Back to having real estate. Real estate is not valuable just because it exists, but because it has the right to access that road. In other words, does it have a curb cut going into the property? Does it have an easement that you can put a billboard on that property? Something you may have not have done, but what are the rights that come with that? These are things that are not tangible, but they can be valued, and they do add to the price that you can charge. Licenses. I have my license from the state of Nevada. It's got another 7 months to run that I'm going to sell, okay? For an LLC, the license is only worth $200, but half a year is $100. Other contractual rights. Okay, this is where you get into, I'm going to call it the nitty-gritty of dealing with suppliers, dealing with customers. There are other contracts that you can have, written or unwritten, okay, that can be breached, but also can be included in determining your price. Next slide, please. That was the easy part of intangibles. Okay? Now let's talk about what has become the number one growth area, and that is intangible assets like intellectual property. A customer list is easy to determine, but the fact that I have, we'll take the most obvious ones, a patent on doing X or Y or Z or this particular product, these are very, very worthwhile. Now, they do not always have to be in a way that the United States Patent and Trademark of having intellectual property is good old Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is a trade secret. It's a formula which is kept in a vault accessed by only two people, blah, 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 down in Atlanta. That formula is worth a lot of money. It's the basis for an entire company and how it has grown. How do you put a value on that? Beats the heck out of me. That there are people who are experts at doing that. There are people who value formulas for making cookies. There are people who it's all over the lot. I mean, and we're very fortunate. We're very close to California, where a lot of this thinking goes on, and you can have a tremendous amount of information available to you. The library over at UNLV, the guys who run that can find an awful lot of things that will contribute to your ability to value intellectual property. That also covers trademarks. How long have you had the trademark? How many products have been sold under that trademark? Copyrights. Did you copyright that pamphlet that you have been mailing out? Did you copyright the article that you put out on the internet? And so on and so forth. Brand names. Again, there are certain brand names that are worth an awful lot of money. Klondike bar. It immediately brings to mind what the heck an ice cream bar looks like. Color, silver, blue, whatever. That's worth money. And that is the kind of intangible asset that becomes extremely important in this day and age, where what you're selling is a service. And this is where this growth has occurred and has been so valuable. The ability to add value to information, the opportunity for people to come back and learn more from your website about the topic that they cared about, your ability to keep them up to date. You're charging them for that, okay? Or you're not, doesn't matter. So long as those numbers are there, that brand name, your website, is worth a bunch. Again, the same thing's true of the logo, okay? North Face immediately calls to mind a particular type of clothing. You've got all sorts of logos that are worth, again, a ton of money. I'll use Coca-Cola again. The formula and the method, okay? We're back to the formula for Coke, but the method, okay? I've had a client here, God, it was some years ago now. He had come up with a way of doing a particular type of weld with materials that are very common in the casino industry. But the other companies in that similar line of business had not come up with that methodology. Again, it's a methodology. It's very hard to patent those things, but you can keep them as a trade secret. You can produce a superior product. You can increase your sales. And then when it comes time to sell that business, all of a sudden you actually have something that you can value, but it's intangible. Okay. It's worth a lot of money to the future of the company. You can put a price on it, but it's not going to be like buying a car. And then, of course, the patents themselves. Patents have different years that they run. There are ways to renew them, come up with variations on them. But they actually can be measured in terms of what impact that patented product had on the market, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So we're continuing on the intangibles. Let me suggest that, again, not enough of the work that goes into determining selling prices is done in this area. The non-compete clause. Okay. My manager, Ivan, of the golf cart shop, had been in the business before. He then was my manager and a part owner with me. And he decided to get out of that business, okay? Move back to Ohio. If he had stayed with the business, my ability to say, okay, I will not start a new business and I will not hire Ivan away from you. Worth money. People can value that because they don't have to worry about my opening another shop down the street and so on and so forth. So in this case, you are the asset. Your ability to compete or to refrain from competing. The important thing here to recognize is that I've been talking about a lot of intangible assets. The important thing to recognize is that the cost of creating an intangible asset, like a patent or a copyright, can be included in the sale price. But you cannot necessarily benefit yourself from doing that because you could have put the value on the books at some point, but it's very, very difficult. If it occurred during the course of business, okay, it became an asset of the business, but you couldn't put it on the books because it came about as the result of a course of business. It just acquired value over the time you owned your business. So you end up with a very valuable asset, okay, but there's no way for you to directly benefit unless the person who's buying the business from you understands that they do have the right to put that on the books as a depreciable asset. It's not physical. Sometimes you can't really depreciate it. The value of a Coca-Cola logo is not going to go down, but sometimes you can. But most importantly, you can put it on the books. In other words, I can give you $100,000 for your business, but if you have included in there an intangible asset that I can put on the books because I bought it from you and I can depreciate it. An asset cost me money, but it's a non-cash asset, and I can reduce my earnings every year by depleting that asset. So all of a sudden, you're in the position of reducing your earnings legitimately, because what you're doing is writing off the value of an intangible asset. The owner who originally created the value can't do that, but you as the buyer can. You as the seller had better be smart enough to tell the buyer about that. It increases the willingness to pay what you feel your business is worth, and it benefits them from the tax perspective in ways that they probably didn't understand beforehand. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're in the position of preparing for the sale. Okay, back to, were you an LLC and did you put any personal expenses on the books? Because that's going to be a problem. It's not going to only be a problem in terms of somebody who's looking through your books and seeing that you may not be as upright a business person as you should have been. But it also is a problem because that's going to reduce the value of the business from a profit standpoint, and thus it's going to increase the problems of the buyer trying to get financing for an acquisition. Accounts receivable, collect them all, write the ones off that you're not going to be able to collect. You want a clean set of books, as it's referred to. Financial statements. Okay, we all stuck with 2 financial statements if we're running a business. The first one is you're going to have to fill out a tax return for the business. Now, whether it is a partnership and all you're doing is preparing a simple list of expenses and including that in your personal return. If it's an LLC, you have to choose as to how you're going to report. Now, there's no such thing as an LLC tax return. You either are going to file a tax return as a corporation, and 1120S is the form name, or you're going to file as a partnership and issue a K-1 to yourself, okay, 1065. The important thing to recognize here is that those financial statements should have been prepared for years. You don't need to go running around trying to make them up just because you now want to sell the business. I've had it happen. I've had people who didn't prepare a good set of tax returns. They, in essence, got away with it, close quote. But now they're trying to sell the business. They have nothing that's substantial to point to, no tax returns. The business plan. At SCORE, we are always emphasizing the importance of doing a business plan. This is not decreased simply because you've already been in business. If you have a business plan that covers the existing year, it makes it a lot easier to tell the prospective buyer, this is what we plan to do, this is how we have progressed against it, okay? In other words, I'm not just producing a set of numbers, I'm producing a set of numbers within a context as to what was I, as a manager, attempting. Relationships. Again, we're talking about what is the deal with your landlord. You've been parking in that spot for all these years. Do you now need to reduce that to writing? Get rid of old inventory. There's nothing more discouraging than walk into a store and in the back room are a whole bunch of things that didn't sell, but you didn't get rid of them. You didn't write them off. It doesn't reflect well on you as a manager, It's certainly not going to do anything to enhance the sales price because all they're doing is saying, okay, here's this bunch of old inventory, you get to throw it out. Not going to work. Office equipment in good order. We're all guilty of this, okay? That printer stopped working. It was going to take too long to get it fixed. I'm going to put it over there and I'm going to buy a new printer. It was cheaper and better anyway. Okay, what are you doing with the old printer? What did you put it on the books to start with? Have you been depreciating it? In other words, are you running this thing as a business or not? You want to get rid of the stuff or fix it or whatever. And then you got to think about how are you going to get paid for selling your business? We all have this wonderful visions of a closing, and you're sitting here with your lawyer and they're sitting there with their lawyer, and all these documents are signed and the checks are exchanged and we all go off into the sunset. It doesn't work that way. For one thing, the level of businesses that we're talking about, you normally can't afford a lawyer to help you with that sale. You really are way better off doing it yourself and understanding what the heck it was you did. But one of the most important things is how will you be compensated? And that gets you into this whole question of, when I sell my business, do I want a lump sum now? Do I want to split the payment into 2 different tax years? Do I want to admit my child into the business and have a piece of the sale price go to the child? Do I want to have the maximum tax advantage, even if it would involve some risk? Now, that is the sale over time, okay? And that is, I'm going to sell my business for $150,000 and you're going to pay me $50,000 a year for 3 years. Well, $150,000 today is worth a lot more than the promise of $100,000 next year and the promise of $50,000 the year after that. Next slide, please. You got to find prospective buyers if you've decided you want to get out of the business, okay? The easiest way to do that is to be in touch with the other people in your industry. So, if you're in the advertising business, you go to all the advertising conventions. You try to make sure that people know that you're running a viable business. That's when it comes time for you to explore selling that business. You've got a bunch of contacts and you use the standard ploy. It's always done. You call Sammy. You say, Sammy, I'm interested in selling the business. Do you know anybody who would be interested? Well, of course, what you're really doing is asking Sammy if he's interested. But it's a wonderful way of doing it, deflecting a lot of this. And it's a chance for Sammy to express his interest. Your employees. I've been through 3 ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, where you have sold the business to your employees. The tax advantages of doing it that way are large, both for you and for the employees. They get a chance to acquire the business at a reasonable perspective from a tax standpoint. Customers. Frequently, this has happened, I got a friend of mine in SCORE who was running his business. He had people coming in, buying stuff from him, same people coming in, buying more stuff from him. finally the people came in and said, you know, why are we letting you get your profit? Can we just buy the business and cut you out as the middleman? It actually happened. Okay. So business owners, not only the call Sammy type that I referred to earlier, but people who are good customers. And then, of course, the competitors. If you're a pain in the ass, you're doing an excellent job of penetrating the market, then why worry about fighting you? Why don't I just simply buy? Let's come up with a cooperative deal. You're getting old. Time for you to move on. Let's work out some kind of a deal. And that eliminates the competitor, which increases the value of your business in his eyes. Next slide, please. Negotiating the deal. Okay, we found somebody who wants to talk about it. Okay. Lots of people will express an interest. Okay. You're gonna have to winnow them down pretty quickly. You've got all kinds of folks who are interested. They don't have any money. Worse than that, they don't have any solid banking relationships. Okay. So, standard set of questions. Okay. What is your current business situation? You check it out. If that business is registered with the Secretary of State, if it's registered with Clark County, whatever. In other words, how solid is their credentials as a potential buyer? Who is your bank? It makes a big difference. I got an awful lot of people who fall for the credit union deal. It's cheaper to do the business at the credit union, and they'll send me a check at the end of the year. This is wonderful. Unfortunately, that is not the kind of banking relationship that's going to facilitate your being able to cut a deal with a buyer. The buyer is probably not going to be able to get a business loan from a credit union. So they're stuck with trying to find other financing, and that's going to delay your deal, or it may not happen at all. Negotiating the deal, lump sum versus installments. Well, I've already given you the example of $150,000 today versus over 3 years. Those things require a lot of thought. The value of money, obviously, when interest rates were 3%, you didn't have to think about it as much as you do now with interest rates at 7%. Because the value of whatever it is you're going to be receiving is going to be going down. Inflation cuts both ways. Increases your price, increases your costs. Non-compete clause. I already talked about that in terms of what you are going to be able to say or do in terms of your being a pain in the ass or not. The other thing is, of course, the opposite of I'm not going to compete with you, and that is I'm going to help you. I run into this several times where the person who's buying the business wants the benefit of the seller's industry contacts, operating knowledge, customer relations, employee relations. In other words, they want them to stay on, smooth the transition. So, how are you going to be paid for that? You're selling the business. You probably had a solid reason for wanting to sell the business. You want to move on to do something else, even if it's nothing except care for your aged parents in Vermont. But the truth of the matter is, that's worth money to the buyer. You get to negotiate what kind of help you're going to give after the sale. Down payment. Is the down payment going to be all cash? Is there going to be something else involved? It makes a difference. And then, if you're going to sell over time, what's the collateral? Everybody's going to say, well, the collateral is the business. You know how good it is. Obviously, I'll stand behind any payments because it's going to come out of the earnings of the business. That's why I'm buying it. Well, let's be a little more realistic. Not everybody can run the business as well as you can. Other events can come along to cause a major problem. Something was unforeseen, like COVID, for God's sakes. So what are we going to do? We're going to have to do something in the way of guaranteeing it, okay? The most legitimate way of doing it is you get a letter of credit. In other words, that buyer goes to the bank and the bank will guarantee that amount of money will be there to make the second installment payment to you because they have issued a letter of credit, which is a guarantee to come up with the money, no matter what happens. So there are ways of having collateral for a term of payment. Next slide, please. So, what are the challenges of selling your business? Well, I've only got 2 people here, and neither of them is selling a business today. So let's not worry about what the challenges are of selling your business. If we wanted to sell the Urban Chamber of Commerce, we could have a long discussion about it, but it's probably a waste of time. Move on. So, what happens if you can't sell? That's what happened to me. With the loss of both key employees, I didn't have anything worth selling because it's great to have a bunch of golf carts and it's wonderful to have a bunch of spare parts for golf carts and it's nice to have equipment to repair golf carts, but it doesn't do any good without the people. The people are the most important part of any business. So you're going to have to pay attention if we're going to close the business. In the founding documents, was there a provision? In other words, if it was a corporation, did your bylaws say what was going to happen? If it was a limited liability company, did the operating agreement specify how the shutdown was going to occur? How do you go about selling the assets? Well, in the case of an extremely valuable air pump, you just let the word out there and there are people calling. The rest of the stuff, much harder. The suppliers, some of them will take it back and give you credit. Spark plug vendors, for some reason, had no trouble with that. Others, you can't get rid of it. In other words, one of the assets of a golf cart shop are the batteries that you take in and you sell new batteries. Well, getting rid of the old batteries is a very well-established methodology. In those days, they were all lead acid batteries. They were just dangerous, according to the government. And so you had to have a legitimate disposal methodology. That didn't change. You just got rid of all of the ones that have been hanging around the back room. Cancel the permits, licenses, and lease agreements. And more importantly, close down the business with the Secretary of State. If you do not close the business, pay the $50. They are going to put revoked on you, and that is going to haunt you the rest of your days as a business person. So it's one of those places it's very easy to look things up, and you don't want to be, quote, revoked. Comply with federal income tax laws. You sell the business, you've got one thing. If you close the business, there's a lot of deductions you can take, okay? The value of the brand name disappeared. You're closing it, okay? If you had acquired that brand name and it was carried as an asset on the books, now you get to write it off. So it reduces the taxable income from closing and the selling off of the assets. You got to resolve out any outstanding issues with the customers. You know, if you had a customer that you said, I'll give you a new set of batteries the next time you need them, you decide to close the business. In the meantime, you got to cut a deal. Creditors, I was very fortunate. I didn't have very much in the way of creditors. A lot of people who have been involved with closing down their business, a lot of the suppliers
We appear to be frozen again.
okay.
Okay.
Get
You're working
professional
again.
help. Well, this isn't always necessary, okay? I was very fortunate. I had spent 30 years in business, 20 with manufacturing corporations, and 10 with through law firms. So I didn't need any outside help in closing down the business. But the average person doesn't have the benefit of, I'm going to call it a close down checklist to go through. They didn't attend this class, obviously. So they may need professional help. There are a lot of good attorneys who will help. There are a lot of tax preparers who know exactly what needs to be done. There are a lot of paralegals that do also. Just a hint there. Next slide, please. All right. The top 3 key points to remember. When you're running your business, plan for the possibility of selling or closing that business. In other words, for God's sakes, keep everything legit. All of those wonderful documents that the state and the county want you to have, the Department of Taxation, keep them current. It will only benefit you down the road, and it's running a good business. If you have even a hint that you may want to get out of the business, make a plan. Talk to people who have been through that process before, who've sold the business. If you've got plenty of time to prepare, I talked to you earlier about an ESOP, an employee stock option plan. This is a wonderful way to do it if you've got the time to plan it. Usually takes 3 years to do this with the maximum tax effectiveness. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are only the 2 of you. I hope that I covered an awful lot of the experiences that can occur for selling and closing a business, and those steps. And ideally, it's something that you were thinking about if you own your own business, and what you're going to do in terms of having that business be a part of your retirement plan. Next slide, please. Are there any questions?
Would you happen to know, like proportionately, how often small business owners that they go into debt or haven't been profitable for recent years, how often they're able to sell as opposed to being closed down either by banks or other creditors? Because I know you were mentioning like one of the checklists you had earlier was about if the profits were meeting your needs, but if they're not meeting your needs, how likely are you to be able to sell, or is that just sort of an industry by industry case?
Yeah, there's a certain amount of industry by industry, but most often people who get to the point where they're deciding to get out of the business, they will try to sell it. They will fail to get a satisfactory price. So they either let it go at a fire sale and then they're stuck trying to figure out what they're going to do with the rest of their life, or they, in fact, close it down, get a job, and move on. Of the 24 years I've been doing this at SCORE, I would say 85% of the people who wanted to get out of business ended up having to close it as opposed to selling it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have no idea how this stacks up compared to the other people who have been delivering these things. But I'll leave that up to you people because you were the ones who were stuck having to listen to it all. And I thank you very much for the help that you gave me in setting this thing up and giving me the chance to talk.
Thank you so much, Bob, for that presentation.
Glad to do it. Sorry that nobody else wanted it.
It's fine. People often watch the recordings.
I hope so. I hope I didn't swear too often.
You're good. Okay, I'll stop the recording now.
Good.